Israel appears to have been behind an overnight drone attack on a military factory in Iran, and that's according to a U.S. official. The defense drone strike hit a defensive structure in the central city of Isfahan on Saturday. In a statement, Israel's defense ministry says 3 drones were shot down and caused minor damage to the rooftop.
The cabinet approved a series of steps yesterday to combat terrorism. On the one hand, we are increasing the deployment and activity of the security forces, and on the other hand we are exacting a heavy price from terror perpetrators and their supporters. This morning we sealed the home of the terrorist who carried out the horrendous attack in Jerusalem, and his home will be demolished. We decided on the cancellation of social security rights of families who support terrorism, and the government will discuss further steps, including the cancellation of identity cards and stripping residency of families of terrorists who support terrorism. We will soon decide on steps to strengthen settlements in Judea and Samaria in order to convey a message to the terrorists that seek to uproot us from our land that we are here to stay. We are not seeking an escalation, but we are prepared for any scenario. Our answer to terrorism is a heavy hand and a strong, swift, and precise response.
התשובה שלנו לטרור היא יד קשה ותגובה עוצמתית, מהירה ומדויקת.
Moving on, foreign stories, the Middle East is boiling again, and let's take a look at this report.
Hatred once again tearing at the fabric. The recent spike in violence, which left at least 16 Palestinians and Israelis dead, brought a tough response today from Israel's Prime Minister.
The cabinet approved a series of steps yesterday to combat terrorism. On the one hand, we are increasing the deployment and activity of the security forces, and on the other hand, we are exacting a heavy price from terror perpetrators and their supporters. This morning, we sealed the home of the terrorist who carried out the horrendous attack in Jerusalem, and his home will be demolished. We decided on the cancellation of social security rights of families who support terrorism, and the government will discuss further steps, including the cancellation of identity cards and stripping residency of families of terrorists who support terrorism.
Netanyahu's 6-point plan includes stripping family members of Palestinian terrorists of their residency, expansion of settlement activity in the West Bank. He also wants to relax gun laws so more Israelis can carry weapons, although he warned against people taking the law into their own hands. Netanyahu was speaking against a background of days of violence. On Thursday, 9 people were killed in an Israeli army raid on the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank, in one of the deadliest operations in years. Israel said it was targeting Islamic Jihad militants. On Friday, a Palestinian gunman killed 7 people outside a synagogue in a settler neighborhood of East Jerusalem. And another attack followed on Saturday when a boy aged 13 shot 2 Israelis. Mourners today attended the funeral of Raphael ben Eliyahu, who died in the synagogue attack. Only a month old, the right-wing Netanyahu government is also facing fractures in Israeli society, with tens of thousands taking to the streets to protest, including at moves to allow MPs to reduce the powers of the Supreme Court.
We're here in Tel Aviv to protest against the attempt to turn Israel into a hollow democracy, or what we see as a dictatorship, basically cancelling the Supreme Court, hurting human rights in Israel. We're here to stop that. The Israeli government is trying to pass a pack of laws that is going to throw Israel into a very dark place.
Into all this steps U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who will try to calm tensions between Palestinians and Israelis by meeting Netanyahu in Jerusalem and Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah in the West Bank. And without focusing on the fundamentals, like trying to revive a moribund peace process, there's little hope here that the Blinken visit will achieve very much. And surely the war in Ukraine is too much of a distraction for Washington to keep its focus on the Middle East. John Cookson, The Rise News, Jerusalem.
But I've been joined by Rise International correspondent John Cookson in Jerusalem, the Israeli capital. John, great to have you this morning. I think make a sense of what is going on in the Middle East this morning for us.
Hi, guys. Great to be on the show. Well, a big day in the region because Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State, arrived shortly for his first meeting with the Netanyahu regime, recently elected last year in elections. As I say in my report, the regime here is barely a month old, and there's huge problems blowing up in Israel and in the Palestinian territories in the West Bank, Gaza, and elsewhere. So what Blinken has to do is to try somehow to cool things down, to speak to Netanyahu, who has been in power on and off for 15 years and now heads a new right-wing regime, arguably the most right-wing in Israel history. Blinken has to try to persuade Netanyahu to calm down the more extreme elements within his own regime. Now, whether he's going to be able to do that is an open question because, as you previewed to this two-way with me, it seems that Israel carried out drone strikes on Iran facilities, military facilities, in the last 48 hours. And so the US has this difficult balancing act of condemning, if you like, Netanyahu for the excesses against the Palestinians, and yet staying with Netanyahu as a keen ally in the region can strike, it seems, with impunity towards Iran, which is causing a great deal of worry in the region at the moment because there are certain reports here that the regime in Tehran is on the brink of getting nuclear weapons, which of course it could use. And the only nation in this region that can strike at Iran is Israel. And we've seen that in the last 24 hours or so, although I have to say the Israelis have not admitted that they carried out the attacks on military bases, including the one in Isfahan. So, as I say, a delicate balancing act for Blinken as he arrives here today.
All right, thanks a lot, John. Just to evaluate what the impact of Blinken's visit will be. Like you've mentioned, as has been observed, that this is perhaps the most right-wing government in Israel in recent history. And bearing in mind that last week they had raided the West Bank and killed about 10 Palestinians, and then the reprisal attack, which was outside the synagogue. And so this year already, the United Nations has said tensions are high. The US and other world leaders have condemned these attacks. However, this visit, a number of people are weighing as to how much impact it would have on, Israel's decision and their stance against Iran and, of course, Palestine.
That's a good question, and frankly, there's not a lot of impact that Blinken can have on the Netanyahu administration, given that the US wants Israel on its side as a key ally in the region. I mean, Blinken can talk to Netanyahu and say, look, it's time for calm. Stop what you're doing, because yesterday there was bigger escalation in policy against Palestinians by Netanyahu. For example, the possible removal of ID of Palestinians who have the right to live in East Jerusalem, the expansion of the settlements, which Netanyahu also announced. There are around 620,000 settlers in the West Bank at the moment, and tens of thousands of more homes are being planned by the Netanyahu regime. And something that we didn't mention there, the Netanyahu administration is quite happy for gun laws to be relaxed in Israel, so more Israelis can get a license to have a handgun. I mean, all of these things are happening on one side, and yet Blinken really is frankly powerless to do much about it, given him the fact that Blinken has to try to keep Israel on side with the potential threat from Iran. We haven't talked about the Palestinians in the West Bank. Blinken goes to see Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority leader, tomorrow. And again, that's going to be a cool meeting. The Palestinians very disappointed, to say the least, with the Washington's position. It seems very detached at the moment. As I said in my report, more concerned about Ukraine than what's happening in this part of the world. The Palestinians feel let down by the Biden administration. And there's not much love lost, no big relationship between Washington and the regime in Ramallah at the moment. So all in all, the Blinken visit, although significant, I'm at a loss really to see what he can achieve in trying to bring peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. It just seems an impossible conundrum to sort out.
Well, John, diplomacy is something to be encouraged at any time. Hence, Secretary of State Antony Blinken going to Ramallah and to Jerusalem. However, how much of a honest arbiter can the United States be in this matter? Is this not hypocrisy at work? Considering the fact that only as recent as December, when the United Nations General Assembly decided to pass a resolution to get the International Court of Justice to give definitive clarifications on the legal consequences on Israel's continued violation of the UN resolution on the 1967 war. The US was one of those countries, along with 24 others, that opposed the resolution. And yet, the US is they're making a diplomatic shot to make one difference when it is clear that the US is biased in the matter.
You make a good point, and the UN resolutions asking Israel to withdraw from Palestinian territories goes back decades to resolutions 242 and 338, and there have been subsequent resolutions after that. There is a feeling, I understand, at the UN in New York that Western diplomats do want America to put more pressure on Israel. But, we're less than 2 years away from a presidential election in the United States, and we all know about the strong Jewish lobby there. And neither Republican nor Democrat really wants to upset this strong pressure from Jews in America. And so, as I said before, the American pressure on Israel can only be so far. It can be only push the Israelis to a point where the Israelis suddenly say, we're not going to help America because apart from possible attacks that we've heard about in Iran, they supply America with huge amounts of intelligence about terror operations in the region. So we go back to this point about America trying to keep Israel on side and at the same time trying to push them on human rights against the Palestinian people. At the moment, Netanyahu is just coasting along. My guess is that he hopes that Donald Trump wins the presidential race, and he and Trump are good buddies. So Netanyahu just carries on doing what he's doing, and the international community, although calling for a lot to be done to pressure Israel, somehow it never happens. That pressure never succeeds on Israel, and Israel continues in the same way as it has before, even more so now with the right-wing regime at play here in Jerusalem.
Thank you so much, John Cookson, for your time.